For many, Michael Brecker was the most influential saxophonist since John Coltrane. He is often referred as a commanding voice in jazz music for several decades through his tireless practice and being able to adapt to almost any musical style, not being confined just to jazz sessions. We all know him as a fabulous tenor saxophone player, but he began at age of 6 with clarinet and later with alto saxophone, before he switched to tenor saxophone for the rest of his life. Michael Brecker had an incredible musical career spanning over 900 albums. Beside recording albums under his own name, which were strictly jazz affairs, he played in numerous jazz rock and straight jazz groups. But the majority of those 900 albums on which he can be heard was from collaboration with many famous rock and pop artists. It is incredible how influential his presence on the musical scene was, even more so when we understand that he passed away at the age of 57, probably not even reaching the apex of his creativity. Playing tenor saxophone in jazz was his calling. That was his artistic love, and we will talk more about that later. But just to get the glimpse of how many incredible appearances he had outside of jazz, let's go quickly over some of the most notable recordings. In 1972, Brecker played iconic solo on the James Taylor hit "Don't Let Me Be Lonely Tonight." 2 years later, in 1974, he played on Mockingbird, on one of Carly Simon's best-selling albums. A year later, in 1975, he had a solo on "Still Crazy After All These Years" by Paul Simon, as well as playing on his marvelous album and world tour, The Rhythm of the Saints, in 1990. We will talk more detail about that tour, which really changed his life in some way. In 1982, he played on debut solo album by Donald Fagen from Steely Dan, Nightfly. A year later, An Innocent Man by Billy Joel. 1984, 57th and the last solo album by Frank Sinatra, LA Is My Lady. His saxophone can be also heard on Your Lady's Trick by Dire Straits on Brothers in Arms. And the list goes on, as I said, hundreds and hundreds of albums. But let's go back to jazz, as that is Michael Brecker's most important legacy. I have tried to go as far back as possible to find when Michael Brecker made his first recording appearance on an album, and I think the first time we can hear him was playing on an album called Score, where he played with his brother Randy Brecker. From early childhood days, Randy watched his younger brother develop his skill through tireless practicing and experimenting. Randy and Michael created jazz fusion group the Brecker Brothers. They have recorded 8 albums, all quite well received by critics and jazz listeners. At the time, David Sanborn often played with them, and he was fascinated with Michael Brecker's work ethics. Mike had a gift for being cross-genre or ecumenic in his playing. He did such a deep dive into Joel Coltrane's music, but he also genuinely loved funk music. So you never got the feeling that he was slamming when he played the solo on the pop or rock or funk track. No way. He never looked down on that music. He was fascinated by it. This is the first tune on the first album, called The Brecker Brothers. The composition is called Some Skunk Funk. The album for the first time shows on the record a close connection between two brothers. The musical connection which allows them to play together with almost telepathic precision. One other album, the Brecker brothers recorded, is also worth mentioning above others, although they all represent their solid contribution to jazz fusion style. At the time they recorded album Out of the Loop in 1994. They have already been almost 20 years in jazz fusion music. Michael Brecker's composition African Skies in the middle of the album is a great example of their style. Michael Brecker later recorded African Skies several times with different musicians. One excellent version of this tune is on the Tales from the Hudson album in 1996, where he is joined by Veco Tyner, Pat Metheny, Jack DeJohnette, Dave Holland and Don Elias. Michael Brecker said that writing compositions was never one of his favorite things when he started to play professionally. What made him do it was a necessity, as he said in one of the interviews, because his brother Randy Brecker wrote the whole first record they made, with the exception of one composition. So when they were soon called to record another album, Michael Brecker felt obliged to continue more, so he started to write. Along with his playing as part of the Brecker brothers, he continued playing on almost 80 recordings at that time as a sideman, until the 81 when he and his brother founded a group called Steps. Two of them owned a jazz club called 7th Avenue South in New York for 10 years, until 1987, and their group Steps was born there.
7th Avenue South was a jazz club located in New York City. It was opened in 1977 by Randy and Michael Brecker, and quickly became a popular venue for jazz enthusiasts. The club was known for its high-quality sound system and its intimate setting, which allowed for a close and personal experience with the performers. It featured performances by many of the top jazz musicians of the time, including Stan Getz, Chet Baker, Woody Shaw, and many others.
After 3 albums, the group was renamed to Steps Ahead, and altogether they issued 7 albums. They're full of really good music, and one I have listened to most is the first album, self-titled. They issued as Steps Ahead in 1983. This is Both Sides of the Coin from this album. That was excellent. But I have to let you listen to another marvelous solo on this album, and it is by vibraphonist Mike Mainieri on the opening track called Pools. Vibraphonist Mike Mainieri was one of the most important members of Step Ahead, and although I adore Gary Barton and love to listen to Lionel Hampton and Michael Jackson, all these vibraphonist greats from the past and present like Stephen Harris or Joe Locke, they are all incredible musicians, but this solo of Mike Mainieri is one of the most energetic vibraphone plays I have ever heard. So let's just listen to all of this magic. The track is called Pools. Michael Brecker recorded his debut album as a leader on Impulse label in 1987, and it is called simply Michael Brecker. Although well known by then as one of the best saxophone players that ever lived, he waited until he was 37 to record his first solo album, because he, in his own words, wasn't ready. Many musicians that have played with him throughout the years emphasize his humility and self-criticism. The compositions on the album are not easy to play, and Michael Brecker, together with excellent teammates, guitarist Pat Metheny, bassist Charlie Hayden, Kenny Kirkland on keyboards, and Jack DeJohnette on drums, play as good as they can. 3 tracks in the middle of the album, Choices, Nothing Personal, and Cost of Living, are the ones I have listened to most when I listened to this album. This is Choices, composed by Mike Stern. That was a really impressive debut album from Michael Brecker, and his second album is just as strong. Don't Try This at Home is the title of the second album. An excellent fusion album which shows Michael Brecker and his remarkable skills, not only on the saxophone, but also on electronic wind instrument, EVI, which was popular at the time in fusion music, although it does sound dated today. Impressive is the cover photo of Michael Brecker balancing Selmer saxophone on the index finger with a smile on his face, though he actually played a different saxophone on the record. He was quite caring about his saxophones and changed them quite often, worrying that with the usage the sound would get more and more distorted. This is last 2 minutes of the Michael Brecker composition Everything Happens When You're Gone, where he builds up momentum with his saxophone all the way to the end of the track. Album Don't Try This at Home brought Michael Brecker his first Grammy Award in the Best Instrumental Jazz Soloist category. He was not present at the Grammy Awards ceremony because he was at the hospital with his wife Susan, who was in labor with their daughter Jessica. In the summer of 1988, the band was in Brazil for the Free Jazz Festival. There is a great anecdote from that time that drummer Dennis Chambers recalls. So he and others were in Brecker's room when Brecker heard Ernie Watts starting to practice his tenor saxophone in the room next door. So Mr. Brecker puts a glass on the wall to listen carefully, and if someone would start talking or make noise in the room, he would shush them to be quiet because he wants to hear what's playing. And they told him, "Who cares? You are Michael Brecker." And he replied, "Yeah, I'm Michael Brecker, but that's Ernie Watts." Incredible, such appreciation for another great artist. Third album is called Now You See It, Now You Don't, and was recorded in 1990. Most compositions are atmospheric and in contrast to the stronger melodic structure of the compositions on the previous two albums. It was less embraced by critics and audience than previous albums, probably because there is a certain lack of focus in most of the tracks. One of the crucial periods of Michael Brecker's career, as we mentioned at the beginning, was Paul Simon's Rhythm of the Saints World Tour. He played on the album and started performing live on occasions with Paul Simon, but was still unsure whether to go on tour with Paul Simon. Brecker just finished his album Now You See It, Now You Don't, and was looking forward to touring and promoting the album with his band. But it was a sweet offer from Paul Simon, a world tour for 2 years. Brecker said at the time, "I've got this offer from Paul Simon to go on tour with him for 2 years. If I do it, my house will be paid for. I'll have money to put away, my kids can go up to college. On the other hand, I worked so hard, I worked my whole life to find myself, and now I can go out and play as me. And what's gonna happen if I put all of that on back burner and go to this Paul Simon gig for a couple of years?"
Paul Simon's Rhythm of the Saints World Tour was a highly successful tour that took place in 1991 and 1992 in support of his album of the same name. Michael Brecker had the opportunity to play saxophone with Paul Simon's 18-member multinational band during the recording sessions for his album, Rhythm of the Saints, and also toured with them for this Afro-Brazilian steeped tour. Brecker was excited to learn from musicians from Cameroon and various parts of Brazil and Africa during the tour. While Simon's work with oppressed African musicians has garnered criticism from some, Brecker believed that the end products of Simon's cultural collaborations were more than justified.
So everyone in the band thought that he will not do it. Even he kept on saying that, "Don't worry about it, it's never going to happen. I'm going to ask for some ridiculous amount of money, they will never give it to me." But they did. Everything he asked for, Paul Simon gave it to him. And even his wife, Susan Brecker, recalls how grateful she was also to Paul Simon for honoring all his promises and making Michael be paid so well. So At that time they bought a house thanks to that arrangement. And the relationship Michael and Paul had grew much more beyond just playing together on stage. Paul Simon really liked Brecker and was always supportive right to the end. Susan Brecker said that when she was organizing the first benefit concert to honor Michael, Paul Simon was the first person she called, and he replied, "Just tell me when and where." Great memories, even more so when knowing that when they first started playing, Simon asked Brecker, whose idol was Coltrane in every musical sense possible, "What's the big deal with Coltrane anyway?" Must have sounded almost like an insult to Brecker. A controversy has arisen in 1992 after Joe Henderson, a tenor saxophone of great stature in jazz community, on two occasions in two interviews, one in Downbeat magazine and the other one in different publication, blamed Michael Brecker for not giving him credit for the music he's playing, saying, "But there are players who are putting stuff out as if it's their music and they didn't create it, I did." And although Michael Brecker later realized that maybe even Joe Henderson was right in a way, the way that Henderson did it so publicly was really not the way to do it. Especially since Michael Brecker was very sensitive to such things and would never hurt Joe Henderson, whom he mentioned many times as one of his idols, his mentors. But there's one more thing that's also interesting in all this and could cast more light on the way Joe Henderson saw the world. He also complained once that Coltrane stole from him, which is quite far-fetched. So his comments about Michael Brecker could also be quite questionable. That was Impressions. Coltrane's composition performed here by Michael Brecker and McCoy Tyner on the album they recorded in April 1995 in Rudy Van Gelder's studio, the very same studio in which John Coltrane recorded several of his quartet albums for the Impulse label. Michael Brecker was approached by McCoy Tyner to do the record together, and they made it perfectly. The album is called Infinity. Impressions that we just heard won Michael Brecker Grammy for Best Jazz Instrumental Performance. This is an excellent album, and I strongly suggest, if you can, take a listen to it. Michael Brecker said for Downbeat magazine that John Coltrane's quartet was the reason he became a musician, as his major influences at the start were McCoy Tyner and John Coltrane. Not long after Infinity, Michael Brecker recorded his fourth album as a leader called Tales from the Hudson. Jazz star lineup with Pat Metheny, Dave Holland and Jack DeJohnette couldn't make anything else but an excellent album. Michael Brecker wrote 5 compositions on the album, including the closing tune Cabin Fever, which was awarded by Grammy for Best Improvised Jazz Solo. Next album is dedicated to the Michael Brecker's close friend, keyboardist Don Grolnick, called 2 Blocks from the Edge. It is, by Michael Brecker's opinion, his most natural sounding record, as he played material previously live with the band. Many tracks on the album were first takes, meaning even more similarities to the way Coltrane was known to make a whole record in one take. On his sixth album, Time is of the Essence, Michael Brecker recorded with organ for the first time. Organist Larry Goldings joined Pat Metheny and three different drummers, Elvin Jones, Jeff Watts, and Bill Stewart.
Well, it's something that Pat and I had talked about doing for years. You know, we've kind of worked together in a number of different situations. I've played on his records and he on mine as well, and have toured together in different configurations. And we had talked about trying to put something together for a number of years, and this was a good time to do it. And it's, you know, turned out to be kind of a dream band. You know, of course, it's always such a privilege to play with Pat, because I walk away. Having learned so much, you know, I walk away like really enriched, and at the same time we're playing with Larry Goldings and Bill Stewart, who are just two remarkable musicians, really reinventing their instruments. You know, they've reinvented, you know, the drums and the organ, and it's really great playing with them every night. So it's every night is a gift.
There was no bass on the record, so kind of an unusual settings for the songs, with the organ and guitar providing support. Michael Brecker was especially thrilled to be able to get Elvin Jones to play on this record. This is Timeline, written by Metheny, where drum duties are in the hands of legendary Elvin Jones. Album that followed is called Nearness of You, the Ballad Book, with Pat Metheny, Herbie Hancock, Charlie Hayden, Jack DeJohnette, and guest appearances by James Taylor on two tracks. Full of romantic renditions of standards and Michael Brecker's compositions, similarities with Coltrane's ballads album are almost certain there. But the originality of musicians made an album that stands on its own. Music on this album is just sublime and beautiful. Take a listen to this. Michael Brecker even said that he subconsciously used Coltrane's ballads as template for this album. In his own words, they wanted to create music you could dream with, but also music that is really challenging to listen to. He says, there's a lot of information there in each tune. We played in a way that we were burning, except in slow motion. A very relaxed, slow burn. In the following years, Michael Brecker worked on many new projects. American Dreams with Charlie Hayden and Brad Meldow with Brian Blade on drums. Directions in Music, fantastic live album with Herbie Hancock and Roy Hargrove. Then in 2003, White Angels, as a leader of Michael Brecker Quindectet with great accompanying musicians, a group too large to mention them all by name here. And this brings us to the last album Michael Brecker recorded in 2006 called Pilgrimage. According to Susan Brecker, the record was made because Pat Metheny persuaded Michael Brecker to make that album. Pat Metheny is also the one that suggested the title Pilgrimage as appropriate for this closing musical moment in Brecker's career. Piano on Pilgrimage was played by either Brad Meldow or Herbie Hancock, and it was Hancock that said that Michael Brecker playing on Pilgrimage was different than anything else he played before, newer and fresher, as he said. Michael Brecker didn't practice for a year before recording this album. It all started in 2004 when, while on stage performing in Japan, he felt a sharp pain in his back. A year later, he was diagnosed with the blood disorder myelodysplastic syndrome, MDS. He was unable to find a matching stem cell donor. Things seemed to improve after he received experimental stem cell transplant treatment, but that didn't last long. This great artist died from complications of leukemia in 2007, 4 months before his last album, Pilgrimage, was released. He will be remembered not only as a great saxophone player, but as a great human being, always there to help others, encourage and support. Not to end on a sad feeling, I would really like to encourage you to listen to his albums. It is powerful music that is not always easily accessible, but the brilliance of his compositions and playing becomes more and more evident with repeated listens, as layers of artistry reveal themselves. Thank you for watching.